The late afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the large windows of the San Jose Public Library, casting shimmering beams across the thin layer of dust suspended in the air. The tranquil scene seemed to soothe the restless hearts of those who entered, but for me, Eleanor, or Ellie, as most people called me, it did little to ease the quiet worries lingering in my soul. Books passed steadily through my hands, one after another. My fingers brushed the worn covers, feeling the rough texture of time and catching faint whiffs of ink and old paper. Each book was a story waiting to be told, but my mind couldn't focus. While shelving a stack of returned books, my eyes paused on one, a dark brown leather-bound volume with the title Adventures in Italy embossed in bold letters. My fingers instinctively flipped open the cover, and as if by some strange coincidence, the page landed on an illustration of the Colosseum. Suddenly, memories surged like a tidal wave, pulling me back to a time long gone. I thought of the fleeting honeymoon in Rome more than 20 years ago. David, my ex-husband, had been a man of romance and passion back then. We wandered through cobblestone streets, dined in quaint little restaurants savoring fresh pasta, and kissed under the soft glow of moonlight. I remembered the way he looked at me, his eyes bright with the promise of a lifetime ahead. But that happiness had been as fragile as glass, shattering under the hammer of harsh reality. Just months later, David left me and Leonardo, our son who wasn't yet a year old. The sweet memories quickly turned bitter, leaving behind a cold, jagged scar that would never fully heal. I sighed and closed the book. My chest felt heavier, but my feet moved mechanically through the aisles, placing the book on its shelf. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was time to leave. Outside, the evening light was fading, giving way to the approaching night. I shrugged on my coat and stepped out, my thoughts drifting to Leonardo. Perhaps he was already on his way home. As always, I pushed the old memories aside, resolving to live in the present, for him. Our small Spanish-style home sat peacefully on a tree-lined street in the suburbs of San Jose. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting golden patterns on the whitewashed walls. Yet, despite the serene exterior, the emptiness within me remained unshaken. As I opened the door, the powerful sound of rock music blasted from Leonardo's room. Its intensity clashed with the calm atmosphere of the house. I shook my head and chuckled lightly. Leo, my son, as he liked to call himself, always turned to music when his mood was unsettled. At 20 years old, Leonardo was a kind-hearted but headstrong young man. His impulsive nature and occasional stubbornness often worried me. I knew he carried more scars from David's absence than he was willing to admit. I knocked on his door. The music stopped abruptly, leaving behind a heavy silence. The door creaked open, and Leo appeared, his face tired, his hands smudged with grease, and his work clothes rumpled. "You're home," I said, keeping my voice light and casual. "Dinner's ready." He nodded and muttered a brief, "Yeah," before retreating into his room. The unexpected coldness stung. I wanted to talk to him, to understand what was on his mind, but the invisible barrier between us had only grown thicker over time. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I stepped into his room and gently closed the door behind me. "What's wrong, Leo? You don't seem yourself today." He sighed and sank onto the bed. "Nothing, Mom. Just a bad day at work." "Do you want to talk about it?" "Maybe I can help," I said, sitting beside him and watching his every expression with quiet concern. He shook his head, avoiding my gaze. "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't worry about it, Mom." I remained silent, not wanting to press him. But the helplessness I felt tightened my chest. All I could do was rest my hand lightly on his shoulder, silently reminding him that I was there. The dim light in his room illuminated his tired face. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much time passed, a mother's love would always follow her child, hoping they could find their way through the darkness. After a quiet dinner, Leo returned to his room, retreating once again into his world. The house fell back into its familiar silence. I cleaned the table, every plate and glass a routine my hands knew by heart. But the warm glow of the living room light couldn't chase away the emptiness creeping into my heart. Sitting alone in my worn armchair, my gaze wandered to the old photos on the table. One stood out among the rest, a family picture from a day trip to Golden Gate Park. Leo, then a chubby toddler with messy black hair, smiled brightly at the camera, his grin as radiant as the sun. David stood beside us, his arm wrapped tightly around me and Leo. The memory was like a beautiful dream, now frozen in time within a glass frame. I picked up the photo, my fingers tracing the innocent face of young Leo. He had grown into a strong, independent man, but to me, he would always be that curious, trusting little boy with wide, hopeful eyes. Staring at the photo, my heart filled with worry. The wounds of the past, David's absence, the hurt Leo had endured so young, would they follow him for the rest of his life? I wondered if I had done enough to help him heal, or if my overprotection had only hindered his growth. I set the photo down and closed my eyes, suppressing the swell of emotions rising within me. A deep sigh escaped my chest. I knew I couldn't live forever in the echoes of the past. I needed to be stronger, not just for myself, but for Leonardo. I had to learn to let go, to look forward to a brighter future where Leo could soar freely, unburdened by the invisible chains of old memories. The living room light continued to glow warmly, and this time, I felt a flicker of hope stir within me, like a faint light breaking through the darkness. The library had always been my sanctuary, a place where towering shelves and the faint scent of old paper seemed to soothe every worry. But lately, even this familiar refuge couldn't ease the restless unease that weighed on me. Sarah, my close colleague, had offered a piece of advice that kept echoing in my mind. "Ellie, you need to do something for yourself. Take a class, meet new people. You can't keep living in the past." She was right, I couldn't keep myself trapped in the loop of old memories. So, I decided to try something new. After an afternoon of searching, I signed up for a beginner's yoga class at the community center near my home. I had never done yoga before, but just the thought of stepping out of my comfort zone sparked a small sense of excitement. I told myself this was an opportunity to refresh my spirit, an open door to unexpected possibilities. The first class took place in a tranquil studio bathed in soft light and accompanied by soothing meditation music. The gentle movements slowly helped me release tension from my body and mind, as though I were shedding invisible burdens I had carried for far too long. And that's when I met Mark. He stood next to me in class, a middle-aged man with a polished demeanor and a warm smile. When he introduced himself, his eyes radiated a kindness I hadn't encountered in a long time. Mark was an architect, and within minutes of talking, we discovered shared interests and a natural rapport. I was surprised by how comfortable I felt around him, like he had brought with him a fresh breeze that cleared away the fog in my heart. He spoke about the buildings he had designed, his love for traveling, and how yoga helped him find balance in his busy life. When the class ended, our conversation spilled into the hallway of the community center. For the first time in years, I felt as though I had something to look forward to, not because of Mark, but because of myself. A small step, a new beginning, but it felt like a door opening to a life I thought I'd lost. Yoga soon became more than just a form of relaxation, it became an excuse for Mark and me to see each other more often. After a few sessions, he invited me for coffee at a cozy little cafe tucked in the heart of the city. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, without any awkward silences. And then came the walks along the Santa Cruz shoreline. We strolled barefoot on the sand, listening to the waves crash gently against the shore as the ocean breeze cooled the summer air. Mark, always thoughtful, brought 2 ice cream cones, vanilla, my favorite. We sat on a small wooden bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of red and orange. Mark was a genuine listener. He didn't just hear my words, he seemed to understand the emotions I couldn't fully express. He opened up about the challenges of his career, the dreams he had yet to fulfill, and fragments of his childhood memories worn thin by time. With him, I felt something I thought I could never experience again, a sense of being cherished, respected, and safe. One evening, Mark took me to a quaint Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet alley. The soft glow of warm yellow lights illuminated every corner, and the slow notes of a piano blended with the aroma of freshly baked pizza and red wine. We sat in a secluded corner, as though the space was meant just for us. Our conversation stretched through the evening, touching on his current projects, my quirky hobbies, and the awkward childhood memories that left us both laughing. As Mark walked me home, the peaceful darkness of our street embraced us. Standing by my front door, he looked at me with gentle eyes. Then, leaning closer, he placed a soft kiss on my lips, warm, tender, and filled with quiet meaning. My heart raced. It wasn't a passionate kiss, but rather a soothing one, as if every fragment of my life had found its place. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. I decided it was time to introduce Mark to Leonardo. It wouldn't be easy, I knew. Leo had always been sensitive to changes in our lives, and I wasn't sure how he would react. Though I had mentioned Mark to him before, his only response had been indifferent nods, as though he wanted to avoid the topic entirely. On a weekend evening, I invited Mark over for dinner. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of Leo's favorite dishes, rich beef stew, warm garlic bread, and a simple salad he always requested. I wanted everything to be perfect, hoping this dinner could serve as a bridge between the two most important people in my life. When Mark arrived, Leo stood by the door, his expression tense. I could sense the unease in the air as we all sat down at the table. Leo barely spoke, answering Mark's questions with brief, detached replies. "Leo, I told Mark how much you love cars," I said, trying to break the ice. "Yes," Leo said flatly, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mark smiled, his tone calm and patient. "I once worked on a project designing a car showroom. I'd love to share it with you if you're interested." From that point, the conversation began to thaw. Mark made an effort, steering the discussion toward topics Leo might enjoy: cars, music, and the rock bands I knew Leo loved. I chimed in with humorous stories from Leo's childhood, like the time he danced endlessly to his first favorite song. And then I saw it, a small miracle. Leo began to smile. At first, it was just a faint curve of his lips, but soon, laughter bubbled out naturally. He started to engage, telling Mark about the old motorcycle he was fixing at the shop and his plans to upgrade its engine. By the end of the meal, when Mark was preparing to leave, Leo extended his hand for a handshake. It wasn't forced, it was polite, even genuine. "Goodbye, Mark," Leo said, his voice softer than before. As the door closed behind Mark, I exhaled deeply, a glimmer of hope warming my heart. Perhaps this wouldn't be as difficult as I'd feared. Perhaps Leonardo, in his own time, would learn to accept Mark and this new chapter of our lives. And maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something warmer and brighter for all three of us. My life was finally regaining balance. The dates with Mark gave me a peace and happiness I had once thought were forever out of reach. Leonardo, though still cautious, had started opening up to Mark. He joined conversations more often and even laughed at Mark's occasional jokes. I began to believe that I had truly stepped out of the shadow of my past and was moving toward a brighter future. But then, like an unanticipated storm, everything changed in an instant. That evening, I sat curled up in my favorite armchair in the living room, a book Sarah had recently gifted me resting in my hands. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock and the warm glow of the lamp spreading across the room. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A message from an unfamiliar number lit up the screen. I hesitated, but opened it anyway. As soon as I read the first line, my heart stopped. "Ellie, I know you won't believe me, but I've changed. I want to see you. I want to make up for everything I've done. David." His name struck me like a blow. My fingers trembled, and the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. Memories flooded in, uninvited and overwhelming. I saw his face in my mind's eye, the eyes that once captivated me, the same eyes that had grown cold as he walked away from me and Leonardo. The promises he once made, the sweet lies I had foolishly believed, all of it came rushing back like old wounds being torn open. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but my heart raced uncontrollably. I turned off my phone, convincing myself that this was nothing but a fluke, that David would disappear again just as he had before. I told myself that I didn't need him, that I was strong enough to move past the darkness he had left behind. But I was wrong. David didn't vanish. He reappeared, inching his way back into my life, with apologies and claims of wanting to make amends. Despite my efforts to slam the door on the past, I now faced an impossible decision. Could I truly let go of all the pain and live fully in the present? Or would the shadows of the past consume me once more? The days following that first message were filled with relentless attempts from David to contact me. He became like a cold wind seeping into every corner of my life, making it impossible to escape. Messages, calls from unknown numbers, and even anonymous social media accounts began to surface. David sent strange, unsettling gifts, old family photos, songs we used to love, and trinkets tied to memories I had buried long ago. What should have been nostalgic instead became the source of dread and unease. I started feeling trapped. The small house I had once considered my safe haven no longer felt secure. Every small sound, a phone chime, the wind outside the window, footsteps in the hallway, set my nerves on edge. One evening, while I was home alone, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. My heart pounded as a wave of fear swept over me. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. There, on the doormat, sat a bouquet of crimson roses, perfectly arranged. I didn't need to check who had sent them. I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away, fear flooding through me like a rising tide. Each blood-red petal seemed like a warning, a reminder that David wasn't planning to stop. The next day, I decided to confide in Mark. After hearing everything, his expression turned grave with concern. He reached for my hand, his voice steady but full of resolve. "Ellie, you can't go through this alone. We need to involve the police. He's crossing a line." I also told Leonardo what was happening. As I recounted the events, his jaw clenched and his eyes burned with anger. "He's harassing you like this? I'll deal with him," Leonardo declared, his voice sharp with fury. I quickly tried to calm him down, but I could see the fire in his eyes wasn't easily extinguished. Both Mark and Leonardo wanted to protect me, but a part of me feared whether any action would truly stop David, or if he would escalate further. The shadows of the past were no longer just haunting me, they were creeping into the lives of those I loved most. One quiet evening at the library, I was rearranging books on a shelf when my phone buzzed. Seeing Leonardo's name on the screen, I immediately picked up. His voice was shaky and laced with anger. "Mom, I just saw him. He's standing outside our house." My heart stopped. The phone felt heavy in my hand, and my legs threatened to give way beneath me. I quickly explained to my manager, left the library, and drove home as fast as I could. Panic swirled in my mind, and I prayed that Leonardo was safe, that David hadn't done anything reckless. When I arrived, I found Leonardo standing by the front door, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with rage. "Where is he?" I asked, scanning the street for any sign of David. "He's gone," Leonardo replied, his voice tense. "He said he wanted to talk to you, but I told him to leave. I won't let him near you again." I stepped forward and pulled Leonardo into a tight embrace, my chest tightening as I felt the strength and determination in his words. "You didn't need to do that, Leo," I whispered, trying to stay calm. "We'll handle this another way. You don't have to take it upon yourself." Leonardo stepped back, his eyes filled with unwavering resolve. "No, Mom. I'm not letting him hurt you again. I'll protect you, no matter what." His words shook me to my core. I could feel his love and determination, but I also sensed a deep fear that his impulsiveness and anger could push things too far, leading to consequences none of us wanted. I knew I had to act before the situation spiraled out of control. David was no longer just a ghost from the past, he had become a real and present danger to the life Leonardo and I had built. In that moment, I made a promise to myself, I would protect Leonardo and the life we had fought so hard to create, no matter the cost. But how could I keep that promise when the darkness of the past loomed so large, waiting for the right moment to devour us whole? After David's unsettling appearance at our doorstep, the atmosphere in our home became stifling. Leonardo was constantly on edge, his eyes reflecting a blend of worry and anger. He no longer laughed as he used to, and our conversations became brief and heavy, weighed down by the tension that seemed to hang in the air. I did my best to play the role of the steady, reassuring presence. I tried to project strength so that Leonardo would feel secure. But in truth, I was just as frightened. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar phone call, sent my heart racing. That evening, after dinner, I was tidying up the kitchen while Leonardo remained seated at the table, staring blankly at his phone. His eyes were fixed on a distant point, and I could tell he was consumed by thoughts of David. He was likely researching, trying to understand the threat his reappearance posed. "Leo," I said gently, breaking the silence. "You don't need to worry anymore. I've already reported everything to the police. They'll take care of this." Leonardo looked up at me, his eyes dark and intense. "You don't understand, Mom," he said, his voice low and charged with emotion. "He won't stop. He's here to destroy everything." Leonardo stood abruptly and strode toward me. The frustration radiating from him was palpable, and when he reached me, he grabbed my hand, holding it tightly. His hand was warm and strong, but the grip carried an unfamiliar intensity. A shiver ran down my spine, freezing me in place. It wasn't the sensation a mother should feel from her son's touch. I quickly pulled my hand away, trying to maintain a calm demeanor, though inside, I felt an overwhelming unease. Leonardo paused, his expression shifting to something unreadable. He looked at me as though he wanted to say something but stopped himself. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there alone in the silence. My hands trembled as I stood frozen in place. I knew something had shifted, something unspoken but undeniable. A boundary had been crossed, and I couldn't ignore it. But I also didn't know how to confront it amidst the growing complexities of our lives. In an effort to ease the tension and reconnect with Leonardo, I decided to follow through on a promise I'd made months ago, a trip to Sequoia National Park. I hoped the grandeur of nature might help us both escape the pressures weighing on us. We set off early in the morning. The soft sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gentle beams onto the mist lingering along the road. When the towering sequoia trees came into view, their sheer size and majesty left me feeling small in the best way. The crisp air, fragrant with damp earth and resin, carried the melodies of birds singing high above. The serene beauty of the park seemed to lift some of the heaviness from my chest. I glanced at Leonardo and saw that he, too, was gazing at the enormous trees, his expression less burdened, his eyes softer. However, nature is unpredictable. As we walked beneath the canopy of trees, the sky quickly darkened. A sudden downpour began, heavy raindrops pelting the leaves and ground with a steady rhythm. We rushed to find shelter and stumbled upon an old wooden cabin tucked off the trail. The structure looked abandoned, its roof weathered and its air thick with musty dampness. Still, it was the only place to escape the relentless rain. Leonardo entered first, scanning the small space before motioning for me to come inside. We sat on an old creaky bench, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. "Do you think the rain will last long?" Leonardo asked, his voice softer than it had been in days. I smiled faintly, though my heart remained uneasy. "Probably not. Nature has a way of surprising us." We fell into a comfortable silence, the rain providing a soothing backdrop. In that quiet moment, I realized that despite our circumstances, being here together, away from all the chaos, felt like a small refuge. As the rain began to lighten, I turned to see Leonardo staring out the window, his face calm but contemplative. I knew we hadn't solved all our problems, but this felt like a step forward, a moment of connection amidst the storm. Inside the cramped cabin, the dim glow of a small fireplace provided the only light, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The sound of the rain continued, softer now, as though it was settling into a gentle rhythm. We sat close, seeking warmth from the fire and from each other. The closeness felt both comforting and disconcerting. I kept my eyes fixed on the flames, avoiding Leonardo's gaze, though I could feel his eyes on me, watchful and intent. When I shivered from the lingering cold, Leonardo silently removed his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. His hand brushed mine briefly, a light touch, but one that startled me. Once again, that unsettling feeling coursed through me, a strange tension that I couldn't explain. My gaze inadvertently met his, and in his deep, searching eyes, I saw not just worry or concern, but something else, something unfamiliar, intense, and disorienting. My heartbeat quickened, not from fear of the cold or even of David, but from an emotion I couldn't allow myself to name. I turned away quickly, drawing in a deep breath to steady myself. I looked out at the rain, telling myself that this was all in my imagination, that nothing had truly changed. But deep down, I knew I was standing on a fragile boundary, one that I couldn't afford to cross. I had to tread carefully, because one misstep could unravel everything. As the rain finally eased and the first hints of sunlight peeked through the clouds, I silently vowed to address what I was feeling, to find a way to protect both Leonardo and myself from the shadows creeping into our lives. We left the cabin as the storm cleared, the damp earth glistening beneath the renewed light. Yet, the storm within me lingered, unresolved and as unpredictable as the rain we had just endured. After the stormy night and the confrontation with David, the air in our home remained tense and uneasy. Meals that were once silent became even more subdued. It was as though an invisible wall had grown between Leonardo and me, one neither of us dared to break down. I tried to bury the unease in work and the comfort of books, but the sense of disquiet lingered. Thoughts of David's intrusion, the events in the cabin, and the emotional complexities surrounding them loomed over me like an unshakable shadow. And then came the night that would forever change everything. I was alone in the living room, curled up in my favorite armchair with a book I couldn't focus on. The quiet of the house was so absolute that I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Suddenly, loud, frantic knocking shattered the silence. My heart leapt to my throat. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the door and peeked through the peephole. David was there. He was drunk, his disheveled face twisted with anger, and his wild eyes glared through the door as if he could see me. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. I fumbled to call 911, but before I could finish dialing, the door burst open with a loud crash. David stormed inside, the stench of alcohol radiating off him. He was shouting incoherently, blaming me for tearing the family apart, for not giving him a second chance. His voice was slurred but aggressive, his hands gesturing wildly. He grabbed my arm, shaking me in a drunken rage. I stumbled backward, my tears blurring my vision. My only thought was to pray Leonardo wouldn't walk in and witness this nightmare. But my prayers went unanswered. The front door flew open again, and there he was, Leonardo. His face was flushed red, his eyes blazing with fury. "Get your hands off my mother!" Leo roared, charging at David without hesitation. The scene exploded into chaos. The two of them collided in a violent struggle, falling to the floor as furniture toppled and shattered around them. I stood frozen, tears streaming down my face, screaming in desperation. "Stop it! Please, stop fighting!" By some miracle, the police arrived just in time. The wail of sirens filled the air, breaking the tension as officers pulled David away, though he continued to thrash and yell incoherent threats. Leonardo stood panting, his chest heaving and his fists clenched. Blood trickled from a scratch on his arm, but his expression remained defiant and unyielding. Once the dust settled, I rushed to Leonardo, wrapping him in a tight embrace. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. "I'm fine, Mom," he replied, though his tone betrayed his exhaustion. I held him tighter, overwhelmed by gratitude that he had protected me, yet deeply shaken by the violent encounter. That night, as silence returned to our home, I realized we had reached the pinnacle of the darkness from our past. But I also knew that we had to find a way to rise above it, not just to protect each other, but to salvage what remained of our lives. In the aftermath, Leonardo became more withdrawn than ever. He stopped smiling, barely spoke, and avoided any mention of the incident. I could see the guilt etched in his face, a weight he carried silently. No matter how much I reassured him that he had done nothing wrong, that I was grateful for his protection, my words couldn't seem to reach him. Desperate for help, I sought guidance from a therapist. In our sessions, I shared the pain, fear, and lingering trauma that had consumed both Leonardo and me. The therapist explained that Leonardo's withdrawal was his way of coping with emotional overload and that his guilt stemmed from the complex feelings tied to defending me against his own father. The most important thing you can do is be present, the therapist said. Show him that you're not just his mother, but someone he can trust completely. Taking this advice to heart, I began to change the way I interacted with Leonardo. Instead of trying to reassure him with words, I focused on actions. We spent more time together, not as mother and son, but as companions rebuilding a bond. We watched his favorite movies, played video games I'd never imagined myself trying, and even attempted cooking together, though neither of us was particularly skilled. I listened as he shared small thoughts and concerns, even the seemingly trivial ones, and I celebrated every tiny step he took toward opening up. Over time, the distance between us began to close. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a film, Leonardo turned to me. His voice was soft, but steady. "Mom, I thought I made a mistake that night, but now I realize, I just wanted to protect you." My heart swelled with pride and warmth. "Leo, I'm so proud of you," I said, taking his hand in mine. "You've been through so much, but we'll get through it together. I promise." That moment marked the turning point. Not only did it bring Leonardo closer to healing, but it also strengthened the bond between us. We were no longer just surviving, we were actively rebuilding our relationship, laying the foundation for a stronger, more resilient connection. Throughout it all, Mark remained a steadfast presence in our lives. He never judged, never tried to fix things that couldn't be undone. He was simply there, quietly supportive, offering a warm embrace and a shoulder to lean on whenever I needed it most. Mark's love was like a gentle light guiding me through the darkness. He didn't just love me for my strengths, he loved me for my flaws, my scars, and my struggles. One quiet evening, after Leonardo had gone to bed, Mark and I sat together in the living room. The soft glow of the lamp bathed the room in a cozy warmth. Mark turned to me, his hand covering mine, his voice steady and full of emotion. "Ellie," he said. "I love you." I looked up, meeting his sincere gaze. "And I love your son, too. I want to be here for both of you, to face whatever comes our way, together." His words struck deep, breaking down the walls I'd built around my heart. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of gratitude and joy. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling, but he shook his head gently, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. But I did. Through my tears, I managed a nod and a smile, finally allowing myself to embrace the love and safety he offered. That night, in Mark's arms, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I saw the glimmer of a brighter future, a future where Leonardo and I could finally move beyond the shadows of our past, supported by someone who truly cared for us. And with that, a new chapter of our lives began. Together, we would find our way forward. Together, we would heal. Life gradually returned to peace after the chaos caused by David. The intervention of the authorities created a clear boundary, ending his harassment. Yet, the memories of that harrowing night lingered, especially for Leonardo. However, I could see him slowly overcoming the trauma, growing stronger with each passing day. One quiet afternoon, Leonardo and I sat down for a much-needed conversation, a heart-to-heart that we both knew was overdue. I began gently, my voice steady but sincere. "Leo, I think it's time we talk openly about everything that's happened. I know this hasn't been easy for you." Leonardo looked up, his expression a mix of hesitation and determination. "I was wrong, Mom," he admitted, his voice low and hoarse. "I let my anger control me. I shouldn't have hit him, no matter what he did." I looked at my son, my heart swelling with emotion. "You weren't wrong for wanting to protect me, Leo. But I understand that anger, it's overwhelming and hard to control. And I was wrong too. I wasn't strong enough to end things with David sooner, to protect you from all of this." Leonardo remained silent, but I noticed his shoulders relax slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. We had acknowledged the hardest truths, our mistakes, our emotions, and the lines we had crossed, unintentionally or not. "We can't change the past," I continued, placing my hand over his. "But we can learn from it. We won't let anything like that happen again." Leonardo nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "I agree, Mom. We need to rebuild, not just as mother and son, but as true companions." I smiled, a sense of hope blooming in my chest. "Exactly, Leo. Let's build this relationship on trust, respect, and real love. The kind that lasts." That conversation marked a turning point for us. There was an unspoken agreement to confront challenges together, to heal our wounds and move forward. The past was now a lesson, a reminder that love and understanding can mend even the deepest scars when we face them together. My relationship with Mark deepened in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. He wasn't just a partner, but a confidant and a kindred spirit. Mark understood the shadows of my past, never pushing or judging, but instead gently encouraging me to look ahead toward a future full of possibilities. Then came the night that changed everything. Under a breathtaking sunset on Santa Cruz Beach, Mark knelt before me, a ring glinting in his hand. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore mirrored the pounding of my heart. "Ellie," he said, his voice warm and steady, "I love you. I love Leonardo. I want to be by your side, building a life together. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and gratitude. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling yet resolute. Mark stood, wrapping me in an embrace that felt like home. In that moment, I wasn't just saying yes to him, I was saying yes to a future brimming with hope and love. Leonardo was fully supportive of my decision. He didn't just offer his blessings, but genuinely accepted Mark, treating him as a close friend within our little family. Watching the two of them laugh and bond filled my heart with a joy I hadn't thought possible. I began to expand my world beyond our family. I joined social groups, tried new hobbies, and rediscovered the joys of simply living. Art classes, volunteering outings, and peaceful morning walks all brought fresh energy and positivity into my life. Life had changed, not just because of Mark, but because I chose to change. I realized that no matter how dark the past might be, beauty always awaits those willing to seek it. Now, I live a life I'm proud of, a life filled with love, hope, and connection. One serene weekend, Mark, Leonardo, and I returned to Sequoia National Park, a place that had witnessed both our struggles and our healing. Under the towering giants, we strolled leisurely, breathing in the crisp air and listening to the symphony of nature. The rustling leaves and birdsong created a peaceful backdrop for our journey. Leonardo, now more open and vibrant, enthusiastically shared childhood memories of the park with Mark. I watched them laugh and talk, Mark's attentive eyes lighting up with interest. Their bond warmed my heart, filling me with immense gratitude. We stopped at a clearing that offered an unobstructed view of the horizon. The sunset painted the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, casting a golden glow on the majestic sequoias that stood as silent witnesses to time. I stood there, taking in the breathtaking scene, and realized something profound. I had truly moved beyond the shadows of the past. The pain and loss that once defined me were now mere reminders of the resilience I had built. Gratitude overwhelmed me, for the struggles that shaped me, for Mark's unwavering support, and for Leonardo's journey toward love and understanding. Most importantly, I felt gratitude for the strength I found within myself to embrace life once again. I turned to Mark and Leonardo, watching them share a laugh beneath the ancient trees, the sunset's glow illuminating their faces. This was my family. This was my happiness. Under the sequoia's gentle watch, I knew we would face the future together, stronger than ever. The storms of the past had passed, leaving a bright, open road ahead, bathed in light and hope.